The time has finally arrived. John William King is finally going to be nothing more than a well-deserved distant memory that unfortunately is going to be immortalized in many people's brains, especially in the brains of the family of James Byrd Jr. And it's so unfortunate, but I'm glad that now that chapter is closed for that particular family in some aspect. I remember when last year I had found out that John William King was going to be executed on this day, April 24th, 2019, and how excited I was about it. Now, June 7th, 1998, I was 9 years old. So at that time I was very young, so I couldn't really grasp everything that was happening with that particular case. But now as I'm older and I understand it more better, it burned me up, knowing what this man had to go through at the hands of John William King and the others that were with him. James Byrd was hog-tied to the back of a pickup truck and dragged 3 miles while he was still alive. 3 miles. Do you know how long 3 miles is? Hell, a mile is long if you're walking or running. So imagine being dragged for 3 miles and you cannot help yourself. And he was still alive while being scraped across that road and hit on blunt objects as they were turning. His body became dismembered. I believe his arm got detached from his body. But the worst part about it is, while that was happening, he was still alive, screaming, and no one could hear him. And the worst happened. His head became detached from his body, which ultimately led to him being killed. And I believe they still continued to drag his body because they didn't care that he was dead. They just wanted to torture this man, all because of a scuffle that happened prior to it. Probably one of the worst cases to fall before any human being in American history. And then in February of 1999, John William King, along with others, were sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, and put on death row. Now, one of the cohorts that were involved ended up getting executed in 2011. That one I didn't really know too much about, because they kept hyping up John William King, because John William King was the ringleader in the entire thing, which is probably why they kept him alive a little bit longer, because they wanted enough to keep him on death row without the possibility of them taking him off of death row, because you know how fickle the court system can be, especially down in Texas, where it can work in the favor of many palm-colored individuals such as himself. But he managed to have to stay on death row. And last year, around October, November, I think it was in November, I finally got word that he was going to have a death date, which was today, April 24th, 2019. And it stayed in my mind ever since then. I have literally been looking forward to this day. Many around the establishment have been waiting for this day to finally come. So he got the lethal injection, a cocktail of sorts. I hope it was slow. I hope it was painful. But you know what's so crazy? He should have went out a whole nother way. He should have went out the same way that James Byrd Jr. did. Hog tie him to a pickup truck and allow him to be dragged for 3 miles, having him hit up against jagged rocks, potholes, whatever they could find. Have his body just be swayed across the road, have him be dismembered, and then have him die while his lifeless body is still being dragged across the graveled path. I had came across an image of James Byrd's burial site. And on it, they said that they actually had to put up a fence around it because they didn't want any vandals to attack it. But one thing that stuck out to me besides that was seeing that it had 2 columns, like 2 rows. Now, mind you, he's the only one that's buried there. It's not like it's a plot. He's the only one that's there. because I saw it and it only had his name on it. They had to do that for a reason. The reason is, and I believe it is, because when he got dismembered, they could not put him back together again. So I believe that they had to put his remains in two separate caskets. When I saw that imagery right there, I was immediately floored. But back to that piece of shit known as John William King. I just had to throw that in there because I couldn't get that imagery out of my head. There was also some other things that were brought to my attention about John William King as of yesterday. One of them being that he supported Hitler. That's usually the go-to for many of these white supremacists anyway, because of like the terminology that he was using, because they found it on a lighter that he had one of Hitler's signature quotes like Heil Hitler or something to that effect on the lighter. But one other thing that stuck out to me, and this was sent to me yesterday as well, was that the minute or around that time that John William King got into prison, right after he was arrested, not so much arrested, but after the trial and him being found guilty, it said that he was repeatedly raped by the black inmates in that prison. Ask me how I feel about that. You already know the answer. You shouldn't even have to ask. But I say good for him in all the atrocities or all the whatever he had to deal with behind those prison walls for the past 20 years. Because that still would not take away the pain that James Byrd had to suffer through for 3 miles of being dragged and dismembered while still breathing. He pretty much, even with him getting that life sentence or that death penalty, that death row, whatever, that was still lightweight compared to what James had to go through. I am enjoying this right now. This is a celebratory occasion. It may not sound like it in my voice because this is a more serious Petty Pendergrass production opposed to the other ones where it's a more comedic, because this one is one of those things you just can't get out of your head. It stays with you. And I know it stays with his family, but I know that his family can, sleep a little bit better now. It's just unfortunate that their loved one had to get taken away from them in such a brutal and malicious way. Like, no person should ever have to suffer through something like that. And that goes for the victim and for the victim's family, because they had to have that suffered through that trial of having to sit in there day in and day out and had to look their loved one's killer in the face for I don't know how many months straight. And not just John William King, but all the involved. Now, I think it was 3 of them. John William King, the one who got executed in 2011, and I believe there was another one. I think they just gave him a life sentence. I don't think they gave him the death penalty. And speaking of death penalty, they said that is the 4th person who will be executed in the state of Texas this year. The 4th one. They say that like it's some kind of a record, and you know what? In Texas, it probably is. I feel absolutely nothing for John William King. I feel nothing for the person who got executed before him. I feel nothing for the one that's still in jail now. I feel nothing for either one of their families. Nothing. You can't convince me otherwise. I am glad that this motherfucker is finally dead. In my opinion, they took too damn long, but better late than never. I never thought I would see the day when I would see a staunch white supremacist who did something like this to some black people or a black person would ever get the death penalty. Now, if I can be alive to see when Dylan Roof gets his, that too will get the same kind of tone and response from me as this one is getting from me right now. And hopefully that does happen in my lifetime. And if I live in good health and in good spirits, it just might. Now, that's another one who deserves to have brutal stuff happen to him as well. And it was close enough too, until they had to transfer him to another jail. But this right here concludes my Petty Pendergrass production, while a little bit more serious in nature, but it was still petty nonetheless, because I'm actually excited. I'm pretty damn I would say, like I said, excited about this man finally being deceased in a physical form from this realm. Now, I told y'all that I was going to add something into my Petty Pendergrass productions going forward, and what a way to kick it off by starting off with this one. So, to take this video out, I have implemented I guess you can say, a clip from one of my favorite movies that actually will conclude every Petty Pendergrass video that I have from here on out. And I even gave that person a name, Petty Debbie. So y'all let me know what y'all think about this down in the comments. And Petty Debbie, please take us out.